Hey folks, A Automotive Reviews. Thanks for coming by. Thanks for listening. And today we're going to talk about the 2021 Ford Bronco. And we're going to talk about the steering today. Now the Bronco is just awesome, folks. Before we get there, we're going to go do some pics and actually look at the Bronco and all of its glory and all of its awesomeness, folks. Today we're going to talk about the steering of the 2021 Ford Bronco. Now, with an independent front suspension, the Ford Bronco can adopt a steering setup that's not really possible on the Wrangler, a solid front axle, a rack and pinion. It's a simple and clean steering design, and it's ubiquitous on all modern passenger cars, and it offers a number of advantages over a steering box. That's what most older vehicles use, but it's now generally relegated to the heavy-duty applications. And we're talking about the big SUVs. Now, let's take a look at a steering rack. And we're going to find a steering rack. We're going to come back to the other steering components too. But this is a picture that's pulled off of eBay, typical steering rack. It consists of a input shaft, which is connected to an intermediate shaft that is ultimately connected to the steering wheel. The rack input shaft has a pinion at its other end, and that pinion teeth mesh with the teeth of the rack inside the housing, such that the turning in the input shaft turns the pinion, sliding the rack axially, which means laterally across the car. Now you see the double-sided arrows below. This pushes the pull tie rods connected to the steering knuckle, which rotates about ball joints and turn the wheels. There's a lot more to learn about this. You can actually search it out on the net. Now these tie rod ends push and pull the steering knuckle, turning the wheel, as you can see. This is a rack and pinion, and turning the steering wheel turns the shaft, which rotates the pinion that rides on the rack. Now the rack slides back and forth, pushing and pulling the tie rods. That's basically how the whole system works. Now we don't see many great shots of the rack and pinion setup on the Broncos, but here's what you can find in the press images. Now this one shows the rack and pinion housing in the input shaft. Let's go and let's find that right quick. And I think we need to go prior to this. Not that. Let's try to go. Let's go here. Okay. Now this is the rack and pinion, as you can see. Now as you can see, this is a rack and pinion housing in the input shaft. Now this is a rack and pinion. As you can see the arrow here. You can see the steering rack here. And this is pretty awesome. Let's take a close look at it. This is the front of the vehicle. And this is how the whole system works. This is how it's all set up. Now let's go and look at the closer one, the one we saw earlier, which was not that one. We need to go back and see this one. We're gonna go through a bunch of pictures before we can get to where we need to be. This is where we need to be. Now the steering tie rod spans from the rack to the steering knuckle. And as you can see, this one shows the tie rod on the driver's side, as you can see. Now, and here's how each tie and rod fastener to the steering knuckle showing. And let's look up that image right quick. We just passed it real quick. And we're almost there. This is where we are right now. The steering tie rod fastens to the steering knuckle, as you can see here. Now, the black cast iron steering knuckle, which houses the hub onto which the wheel mounts, rotates about this ball joint and another ball joint above the wheel center line, which is not shown here, but you can have an idea of where it is, as you can see. Again, this is the passenger side. Now, none of this is particularly novel, but it is vastly different than what's found in the JL Wrangler, which is an old style recirculating ball steering wheel box. Now the JL aluminum box, or aluminium box, as we can see here, let's go to that one right quick. Take a look at the aluminium box. Now, here's the steering box mounts to the frame, and the output shaft here, and the input shaft here. So this is where the steering wheel goes, and this is how it does all of its turning. So the recirculating ball steering box design is what this is. Of course, it's an aluminium box, and this mounts to the inside of the frame rail. Now the steering box input shaft is hooked to an intermediate shaft, which is ultimately attached to the steering wheel. Now, turning the input shaft, or the worm shaft, WRM, our ball screw, moves a ball nut rack against the sector shaft gear, which spins the output shaft, also called the sector shaft, or pinion arm shaft. Now, you can learn more about this steering boxes online. You can check it out. But the point is that there's a lot going on, especially compared with the basic rack and pinion design. Now, on that output shaft, or sector shaft, or the pinion arm shaft, is what is called the pitman arm. Now, as the output shaft rotates, the end of the pitman arm swings an arc, pushing and pulling a big metal bar called the drag link, which hooks to the steering knuckle. Now, let's go and look at some pics, which basically shows that. Now, you see here, this is the part of the pitman arm, which is shown here in black. And this is the steering box output shaft, as you see there. And then you have the steering box mounted to the frame, which is quite nice, folks, as you see here. And let's go back and rephrase that. Now on the output shaft, our sector shaft of the pitman arm shaft is what's called the pitman arm, which you see here. The pitman arm. So now, as the output shaft rotates, the end of the pitman arm swings in an arc, pushing and pulling a big metal bar called the drag link. Now, that hooks to the steering wheel knuckle. So here the pitman arm, and let's go back and let's look at some more of this. Let's go back to this baby right here. See, and here the pitman arm, which again connects to the steering box output shaft, to the drag link that connects to the steering knuckle. And you can see this end of the pitman arm sweeps an arc, and the drag link pushes and pulls the steering knuckle. And you see that down here. And then you see as the pitman arm sweeps, it pushes and pulls the drag link. You see this is being pushed and pulled. And then this is what you have. Now the final piece of the steering system is the steering tie rod, which connects the two knuckles, so that as the driver cranks the wheel, turning the intermediate shaft going into the steering box, turning the steering gearing box output shaft, sweeping the pitman arm, pushing and pulling the drag link, pulling and pushing the steering knuckles. Let's go and just take a look at some more of this right here. Now this is now the tie rods connect both knuckles, so as it drags the links and rotates the passenger side knuckle, the knuckle pushes and pulls the tie rod and what that does is rotate the driver's side knuckle, and both wheels steers, as you can see here. It's quite epic. Pretty cool when you go back and look at the basics and just see, what your inputs actually do to the vehicle. Now, it should be obvious that the Wrangler old school steering box design leaves a lot of room for messiness, or what we call slop. Not just in the gearbox itself, but also in the linkage connecting the gearbox to the knuckle. Now, we will also add that the steering boxes tend to be robust, and so do all the linkage, especially compared with what appears to be relatively spindly little tie rods coming off the Bronco rack, which also has exposed rubber bellows that could theoretically tear and let in water. But the Wrangler tie rods show above, joining the two knuckles, span nearly the entire the track width. It sits low and is also in a vulnerable spot. Now, the Wrangler design is beefy and works well for the solid axle, with lots of articulation. That said, there are plenty of advantages to the Bronco rack and pinion design too. Now, the first person with Ford had 30 years of vehicle dynamic experience, having worked in the U.S. automakers and major steering part supplier. And he doesn't want to be, but it's his input. But what he says is that this system is not exactly efficient, and it does tend to wear as far as wear a lot. Now that means it's going to wear with time. Now the recirculating ball steering box is by far the easiest design to make robust at higher loads. This is simply the steering architecture results, since the box is rigidly mounted to the frame and isolated from the axle by replaceable linkage. And this is called a Class 4-8 truck. So that's why Class 4-8 trucks have them. On the downside of the steering box, and let's go back and look at and see if we can. Now the downside of the steering box is that they are more prone to friction and wear due to exactly the same design criteria. They eventually wear out, and they're built as a last resort in a less precise steering feel on the road, and that's something that you don't want. But if you break the rack housing or a tie rod, you basically can't fix it. You're off the road. Now, mitigation of this vulnerability is that truck racks are usually tucked up near the engine as high as possible and covered with metal skid plates. The engineer then added that he went on to talk about the modern steering racks. They're not only tough, but precise, lightweight, and because they have electric motors built in, it allows for various advanced driver assist features, which the Ford Bronco has a lot of them. Now, the electric racks now have much higher in capability and provides much better steering feel and precision than the box solution. Now, a final huge benefit is the ability to integrate lane control and semi-autonomous steering functions, which a box cannot provide since you need a rigid, direct steering force. Now, feedback for these is the ADAS solutions. Don't ask me what that acronym stands for, but basically we're just talking about semi-autonomous driving and lane keep assist and all those functions. So in general, the Jeep has a traditional off-road solution, but with it comes compromised steering and no precision feel of the wheel and no ADS. Now, the Ford has a much better steering feel, plus the future proofing on the lane control abilities. And lane control actually makes driving much more relaxing and stress-free. Now, the last contrast is cost, where the rack is at least 30 to 40% more costly than the box. But with the overall weight savings, the steering box and linkage are much heavier. Now, another engineer working for a prominent steering supplier, who also wished not to be named, did lay out some more shortcomings of the steering box. He begins by describing how sloppy steering boxes can be and how they can contribute to the dreaded, what in the off-road world we call the death wobble. Now, that has really messed with Jeep since 1941. The predominant advantage of a rack and pinion design is the overall steering feel and the performance. Now, in a rack and pinion, both wheels are controlled by a common component, whereas the steering box requires one wheel to turn the other, which can be a huge liability for steering feel because of the chain of effects to the steering, everything. You just miss it and there's no feel. Now, even the stiffest steering box systems have far more lash due to the length, the movements, the adjustments that need to travel, generally larger reference. Now, this is also a component of the dreaded death wobble that we all hate, and no one really wants that because it feels damn near unsafe. Now, it's virtually impossible to get a death wobble on the rec system because of how little lash and flex there is in the control system. It's just more solid. Now, the engineer went on to echo the previous engineer's sentiments about the advanced driver's assist limitations, which is called ADAS, weight savings and efficiency. Now, another major item is that the Bronco probably uses the electrically powered steering system, not a hydraulic system. Now, some commercial trucks are now using the electrically assisted steering boxes, but as far as we know, the JL is still very much hydraulic. This limits the ability, or FCA's ability, to include many of the convenience and safety features that are included in today's modern cars and trucks, like lane keeping assist, which we talked about earlier, automatic parking, in addition to having different steering tunings for different conditions, snow sport, etc. That is all available for the Bronco. EPS also improves fuel economy, power availability, and overall weight, because the steering pumps and hydraulic circuit components are removed from the vehicle. The gain is a few more horsepower and reduces friction and drive loss by not needing to constantly driving, the hydraulic circuits. It makes a hell of a difference, folks. The steering boxes, though, the positive side of the steering boxes is that, they're tough. Rack and pinion is awesome, but the steering box is really tough. And what do you gain with steering boxes is that it's incredibly durable and comparatively easy to fix in the field, like when you're out and about. Most steering boxes are cast iron linkage, iron or steel, and everything can be welded back at a pinch. Hoses can be taped up, pumps can be located high on the engine to keep it safe from major impacts, and this durability concern can be mitigated on a rec system by being packaged up in the vehicle and protected, by the skid plates and other more sacrificial underhood components. The exhaust primarily, but it still goes to be a lower component under the hood. Also, for assist, the EPS is really all or nothing. You can't fix it on the trail. If you lose your motor, EPS motors aren't generally sold separately. They require dealership and recalibrations and maybe a whole new system. Even in the event of a motor failure, it's all still going to be steerable without assist. But whereas the Wrangler can potentially gain back its power assist with some basic repair, you are out of luck with the electric system failure. So the steering engineer that works with the Ford finished by saying that he thinks that the Bronco is going to be a huge winner because it will have more responsive steering feel and all of the fancy assist features, and almost standard on all the new cars of today. So you really, with the Bronco, you really do good, and it still wins in the steering. But again, the Jeep, I tell you, if you're going to be in the mountains and everything else, and you're not going to be going to work, or you work in the mountains, or you don't have to worry about the death wobble and everything else, the Jeep actually would be the one to get. It's just a hardcore beast, and with the old technology, and you don't have to worry about no lane keep assist or nothing like that. And when you're on the road, you're only on there for small moments, but most of your life is spent in these terrains, in the beautiful terrain of the outdoors. You guys, thanks for listening and thanks for watching. This is AR Automotive Reviews. This Bronco is awesome. Have a fantastic day.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more interesting videos.